situations for a very long period of time. This was one of the main positives around this coalition is that we know when there's a scarcity of resources that communities are pitted against each other. And I suppose this coalition is a broad coalition that represents Irish workers, Indigenous workers, migrant workers, people in direct provision, people from across all aspects of society, people in different circumstances. So it's really important that that solidarity is there across all society, and I suppose May Day is a manifestation of that solidarity for workers, but also in relation to homelessness. So we're delighted to be part of that. And I suppose we would, echo all the calls of the coalition. HAP is not the answer. It's a short-term interim solution for people. Investment in social housing and public housing is key. But security of tenure, obviously, there is a need for a private rental sector, but people need security and long-term security in that they need to be given tenancy agreements because it is a solution for some people. And that needs to be greater regulated, which is the Pines in accommodation in Cabinteely. This was a house where up to 70 migrant workers were housed in really poor and substandard accommodation. There was bunk bed upon bunk bed put into the rooms. There was 3 toilets, 2 of which were functioning. The property was generating about €10,000 a month, which is about €120,000 a year in profits for large-scale unscrupulous landlords. So this is a trend that we're seeing more and more of, people being forced into these types of accommodations. And I suppose this is alarming. It's a very alarming case, and there's more of these houses across the city. And this is what we're being left with the lack of investment in the private rental market. And so I often hear that people say, oh, well, you come, it's a rite of passage. You have to live in crap accommodation and overcrowding accommodation, and that's just not acceptable at all in this day and age. In terms of migrant workers as well, access to homeless services is also conditional on your residency. So there's a huge problem for people who don't have legal status in the state in terms of accessing homeless services and in light of their precarious legal status. I agree, the right to a house is a fundamental right. Having safe and decent living conditions is fundamental to the way we want to live. So I think there's been a lot around causes, and I suppose what we see in our services as well. I think May Day is obviously a sensitive day for our workers, and particularly for low-wage workers. In our services, a quarter of people who come to them have housing needs. That could be related to insecure accommodation, renting without a lease, being at risk of homelessness, being homeless, or living in very overcrowded situations. And I suppose low-wage immigrant workers are overrepresented in the private rented market, I suppose, as you all know. Many don't live in privacy. Many families are living on top of each other in 2, 3, 4 bedroom houses. There's a lack of dignity for people living in this way, and it's not the place that you want to call home. What we see when there's a supply issue, it's a breeding ground for racism and discrimination in the rental market. And many people talk to us about their situations of turning up at a doorstep, trying to rent accommodation and being turned away. Most people think that this is discrimination, but they can't prove it. So there's a massive problem for people even trying to access the private rental market as well. So this means that minority ethnic communities are often pushed to the outskirts of cities due to affordability. And I suppose the precariousness of low-wage migrant workers' lives means that really you're only a paycheck away from being homeless. But overcrowding is nothing new. But what we're seeing, we're in a new era now of mass overcrowding and organised large-scale provision of accommodation.
Sure that a large number of people will never be able to afford to purchase a home. Even people who are on the average industrial wage, which is around €43,000. Now most people don't even hit that because that's calculated on the basis of a skilled wage. So if you have people working in the unskilled sector or working in the services sector, they're never even going to come near that. So people on the average industrial wage won't be able to afford to buy a house, and goes without saying, people below that are even further away from that situation. So there are many proposed solutions to this problem from a variety of different groups, but the common thread for both the trade unions and for organisations who are working at the coalface of homelessness and housing distress is a recognition that a massive public housing building project needs to be undertaken, and it needs to be undertaken urgently. There has to be a recognition that the local authorities can play a much greater and leading role in the delivery of public housing alongside that of the affordable housing bodies. Now this contrasts very much with the Action Plan for Housing and Homelessness, which sees mainly the private sector and approved housing bodies delivering all of the supply of housing. A longer term priority really should be the establishment of a national housing delivery agency, which would be proactive in the management of land supply for the delivery of appropriate, timely and cost-effective housing output in Ireland. This is the other missing link from the government's policy for house building. Affordable and quality homes is causing a significant crisis, not just for the workers that we represent in the trade union movement, but for families and individuals right across the Republic. And by affordable, I mean affordable rents and affordable purchases. Recent available data from DAFT earlier this year showed that there was just over 4,000 dwellings available for rent on the 1st of February 2017, and this compares with 23,000 dwellings that were available for rent in 2009. And it also shows that rents have now surpassed what they were in 2008 in the boom time, and even throughout 2016 showed an average annual increase of about 13%. So the enduring shortage of public housing in the Republic is a persistent problem. The state-owned supply of public housing has diminished drastically over the years. In the 60s it was at about 18.5% of total stock was owned by the state. That dipped to 12.5% in the 60s, and it's now down at an all-time low of 8%. So this has led to an over-reliance on the private sector and the provision of housing, for the provision of housing in both the rented sector and in the private purchase sector. So currently about 70% of the housing stock is owner-occupied now, so that means that 30% is rented. So the reality of life for most people now is that they will spend their lifetime living in the rented sector.
Years, and the reality is that a lot of those who are becoming homeless today are being kicked out of the private rented sector. So it baffles me as to how the private rented sector, which is a major contributor to the problem, can become a solution to the problem. So it seems to me that is the major flaw. We've got to get back to, people don't want private rented housing because they don't have the security of tenure, unlike in other European countries. Parents with a 5-year-old child going to the local school wants to be sure that she will still be living there in 10 years' time when the child is 15 and still going to the local school. You don't have that in the private rented sector. You might get a 12-month lease, you might, if you're lucky, get a 4-year lease, but even during that lease, the landlord can come along and say he's selling the house and you're gone. So people don't want the private rented sector. And yet, if you read the Minister's Plan Rebuilding Ireland, there's a huge emphasis in trying to emphasise the importance of the private rented sector and the value and the need that people are choosing the private rented sector. They're not choosing the private rented sector. They're going in because they don't have any other choice. So I think we've got to get back to providing social housing. For me, social housing is housing that is under the control of the local authority or some other state agency, not under the control of private. We've got to get back to providing social housing, providing perhaps even rented social housing, but under the control of a state agency, cost affordable rental housing run by a state agency where you have security of tenure. That for me is the key issue in moving forward in terms of social housing, providing security of tenure at a price that people can afford going into the future. For me, housing is the most basic human right. For me, there's 5 basic human rights: the right to adequate food, the right to education, the right to healthcare, the right to work, and the right to a home. And without one of those, if one of those is missing, it's very hard to lead a fulfilling adult life. But the right to housing is the most basic, because if you don't have a home, you're not going to eat properly, your health is going to deteriorate, you're not going to be able to access education, you're not going to be able to access employment. So for me, and if government's responsibility is to provide each citizen with their basic human rights, then it seems to me government's primary responsibility is to ensure that everybody has a home at a reasonable price that they can afford. Crisis we have today, it seems to me, began during the Celtic Tiger years. Government tried to present it as a financial issue because of the recession, but it actually began in the middle of the Celtic Tiger years when we had more money than we knew what to do with. And the government decided for ideological reasons to transfer social housing to the private rented sector. And so instead of in 1975 in this country we built 8,500 social houses. In 1985, when we were in the middle of a recession, we built 6,900 social houses. In 2015, we built in this country 75 social houses. So it's that reduction, a huge move away from social housing that has created the crisis that we have today.